We've all read the story of the farm boy destined for greatness, right? The reluctant hero, the ancient prophecy, the looming dark lord. We know the beats, we know the rhythm, and we know how it's supposed to go. For two full books, I thought I knew exactly where John Gwynne's The Faithful and the Fallen was headed. I was strapped in for a well-told but familiar journey. And then I read Ruin, and I realized the author was playing a completely different game. I went into this book expecting an epic sequel, another chapter full of heroic charges and desperate battles. And while it has those, what I really got was a masterclass in how to break a hero by taking away the one thing he thought was real: his destiny. The fallout from that one central twist is what elevates the series from being simply good to something truly great. But before jumping in, let's get situated. Ruin is the third book in a series that wears its epic fantasy influences proudly, but isn't afraid to challenge them. Back in Malice, we met Corbin, your classic young farm boy hero, and watched him as he was swept into a world of ancient prophecies and brewing war. Valor took that foundation and hit the accelerator, throwing us into non-stop battles and escalating stakes. And now we're here. Ruin is where the threads start to tighten, the choices start to hurt, and the consequences start catching up to everyone. This is where the series shifts from the familiar comfort into genuinely unpredictable territory. Guys, this review is going to contain spoilers for Malice, Valor, and Ruin, so if you haven't read them yet, save this video, go read like 2,000 pages of The Faithful and the Fallen, and then come back. At its core, Ruin is where the war for the Banished Lands fully erupts, and every choice the characters make carry consequences that feel permanent. After 2 books of buildup, this world is now on fire, both figuratively and in some cases literally. Corbin, who started as a blacksmith's apprentice way back in Malice, has now become the center of this widening conflict. But here's the thing I love about Gwynne's take. Corbin's rise isn't some effortless chosen one destiny. He's reluctant. He wrestles with leadership and the cost of every decision, and with the sheer weight of having people follow him into battles where not everyone is going to make it out. His leadership is earned, not given. Meanwhile, on the other side of the board, Nether continues his slide deeper into villainy. But Gwynne keeps him fascinating. Nether still believes himself the hero. He sees himself as the one bringing order and salvation, even as his actions get darker, even as he surrounds himself with monstrous allies. And watching Veritas finally confront that, finally seeing through the lies he's been trying to justify for 2 books, is one of the emotional linchpins of Ruin. But it's not just Corbin and Nether. This entire book is packed with major character arcs colliding. First, we have Gwynne, and he gets some of his most brutal, most satisfying moments here. His rage boils over, and in that unforgettable scene with Lycos, you know, the one where Gwynne goes full berserker and quite literally bites part of Lycos' face off, it's raw, it's violent, and it feels absolutely earned after everything we've seen Lycos do. Fidele steps even further into her own agency, navigating the political dangers while building this beautifully grounded romance with Gwynne that doesn't feel like a YA subplot. The romance feels real, it feels adult, and it gives the book some surprisingly emotional warmth in the middle of all the bloodshed. Then we have Camlin, and he started off as a relatively minor side character, but he's continued to develop into one of my favorite redemption arcs in the series. He's gone from thief to reluctant hero, and his loyalty to Adana gives some of the book's more tender moments. And then you've got characters like Jael, who you just want to see get punched in the face every time he appears. Seriously, I hate this guy. Gwynne builds him up as that perfectly detestable weasel villain. You hate him in every scene, which is exactly the point. But Ruin isn't just about personal journeys. The larger war is escalating in terrifying ways. We see the monstrous power of the Kadoshim and their terrifying constructs, the effigies, these foul magical abominations that strip free will away and turn people into puppets. The moment where Veritas burns those effigies, one of the most cathartic scenes in the entire series. I legitimately cheered. And let's not forget that this is also the book where the gods themselves Elion and Azeroth start moving out of the background. The war isn't just human anymore. The ancient struggle between Bright Star and Black Sun is creeping into every part of the narrative, twisting the political conflict into something mythic and apocalyptic. And this brings us to the prophecy. This prophecy, the one that's driven so much of Corbin's arc, starts to unravel. We learn that it may have been manufactured by mortal hands, by those pulling strings behind the scenes. That revelation, we're going to dig into it more later, but that's where Gwynne really starts playing with the reader's expectations and pulling the rug from under the whole Chosen One narrative. And all of this is layered over a rising body count that hits harder than anything we've seen in the series so far. Gwynne isn't pulling his punches anymore. Major characters fall. Bryn is gone, Evnis finally gets what's coming to him, and honestly, that one is deeply satisfying after everything he's done. But then there's Tuckle. That one stinks. Even though you can see his death coming, it still lands like a gut punch when it happens. By the time we reach the end of Ruin, everything feels shattered. Corbin has been captured, Adana's people are broken and scattered, Jael and Nether are still standing, their power only growing. And Gwynne leaves us hanging on the edge of that brutal cliffhanger, staring straight into the storm of wrath. Ruin isn't just good. This is where the entire series steps up to another level. And it's not because it abandons what came before, but because it finally brings everything together in a way that feels fully realized. However, there are a few things in this series that continue to frustrate me, and I have a feeling I'm not going to be alone here. But first, let's talk about the pacing. If Malice was all about laying the foundation, and Valor was pure forward momentum, non-stop battles, rapid turns, a constant sense of escalation, Ruin kind of finds the balance between the two. There's still plenty of action here, and the battle sequences are as sharp and cinematic as ever, but this time, Gwynne gives us room to breathe. There are more quiet moments where characters wrestle with their choices, where relationships deepen, and where the emotional stakes start to weigh heavier than the physical ones. You feel the cost of this war in every decision, and because of that breathing room, when the action does explode, it hits even harder. And while the pacing feels more mature, so does the prose itself. You can see Gwynne's growth as a writer in real time. His sentences are tighter, his descriptions feel more immersive, and this isn't purple prose or overworked lyricism. It's clear, sharp, but with just enough flourish to pull you deeper into the world. There were multiple moments while reading Ruin where I actually stopped to reread a line because it landed so perfectly. That wasn't always the case back in Malice. You can tell that in 3 books in, Gwynne has hit his stride. But where Ruin truly separates itself is this emotional impact. Gwynne has always been willing to kill characters and to put them through suffering. But here, the weight of those losses finally starts to feel personal. I had 2 major moments where I genuinely got chills that ran through my body. That scene where everyone swears loyalty to Corbin, man, that one got me. This entire series has been building toward that moment, where Corbin fully steps into leadership, not because of a prophecy, but because these people believe in him. That scene is heroic fantasy at its absolute best. It's the kind of moment you hear swelling music in your head as you read it. Corbin grows tremendously. He's still reluctant, still deeply human, but he's learning to accept that people are willing to sacrifice for him because they believe in his cause. He doesn't want power for power's sake, and that makes his leadership feel earned, not inevitable. The leadership takes on a whole new weight after one of the biggest twists in Ruin, the revelation about the prophecy. For 2.5 books, Corbin has carried this enormous burden, believing he's the bright star, the chosen one destined by the gods to lead this fight against Azeroth. It's shaped how others viewed him, and it's shaped how he views himself. But then Michael drops the truth. The prophecy was fabricated. It was never divine. Michael created it purely as a tool. A lie designed to give people hope when they needed something to believe in. Without it, he feared the fight would be lost before it even began. And what's so powerful about this moment is how Corbin responds. He doesn't collapse. If anything, he stands taller because now he knows that every decision he makes isn't part of some cosmic script. It's all his. He earns his leadership through choice, through action, through the people who choose to follow him, not because they're promised victory, but because they believe in him, in who he is, and what he stands for. It's such a smart subversion of the chosen one trope, one of the most overused narratives in fantasy. And Gwynne flips it into something far more human, far more relatable, and honestly far more inspiring. But it also raises the stakes for what's coming next, because now heading into Wrath, we know there's no divine safety net. There's no guaranteed triumph. Just Corbin, his people, and the war they've chosen to fight. And the enemy still believes they're invincible. But beyond Corbin, we have Veritas, who in many ways becomes the emotional core of the book. We've watched him struggle with his loyalty to Nether for 2 entire novels, justifying every compromise, telling himself that it's all for the greater good. But in Ruin, Gwynne finally brings him to the breaking point, where Veritas can no longer lie to himself about who Nether has become. That moral clarity is one of the most satisfying payoffs in the entire series. It's not a sudden change. It's a slow, agonizing reckoning that makes perfect sense for his character. Even Nether, as a villain, remains fascinating. Gwynne never reduces him to some simple tyrant. Nether believes he's the hero. He believes he's bringing order to chaos, that his cause is righteous, that his betrayals are necessary sacrifices. That kind of delusion is far more chilling than a one-note villain. You see how easy it is for someone to justify atrocities when they're convinced themselves it's all for the greater good. And that brings us to the rest of the villains, because Gwynne gives us a full spectrum of evil here. Lycos, he remains as despicable as ever. The kind of villain you're counting pages waiting for someone to finally take down. That scene where Macwin launches himself across the table, attacks Lycos, you can practically feel the rage explode off the page. And yet, even after that brutal moment, when Macwin literally bites part of Lycos' face off, Gwynne keeps Lycos alive, letting that tension hang over the rest of the book. But that's not always a good thing, and I'm going to explain why in a bit. Jael, on the other hand, is a very different kind of villain. One that is almost uniquely detestable. He's a sniveling, opportunistic coward. The kind of man who runs from real danger, schemes behind everyone's back, and somehow keeps surviving because he's too slippery to pin down. You hate him in every single scene he's in, and that's exactly the point. Jael might not have the raw power of someone like Nether or Calidus, but his brand of cowardice and treachery is infuriating in a way that makes every reader want to see him finally get his comeuppance. And then, of course, we have Calidus, who operates on an entirely different level. He's not just manipulating mortals. He's the Prince of Lies, the silver-tongued puppet master serving the fallen god Azeroth. What makes Calidus terrifying isn't just his power. It's how easily he plants doubt and rationalization into those he corrupts. He doesn't force people to fall. He whispers just enough truths into their ear to make them justify it themselves. That kind of subtle villainy is far more dangerous than brute force. Altogether, Ruin doesn't just succeed. It elevates the entire series. The action remains gripping, the character arcs land with real emotional weight, and the moral complexity continues to deepen. This is Gwynne proving that he's not just playing with familiar fantasy tropes. He's actively reshaping them into something far more powerful. But guys, I've waxed poetic enough. Because alongside everything I admire about Ruin, I also have to acknowledge what continues to frustrate me about The Faithful and the Fallen as a whole. And that's the sheer amount of plot armor that Gwynne gives his villains. Let's call it what it is. The villains in this series, they're practically invincible. And not in a way that makes them intimidating or impressive. In a way that feels frankly exhausting. We are 3 books in, and outside of a few isolated skirmishes, the villains have suffered almost no meaningful setbacks. They win nearly every battle. They walk away from nearly every confrontation. Even when they lose, it usually doesn't cost them anything significant. The good guys, meanwhile, they drop like flies from minor wounds. A simple sword cut will take out a hero permanently. But for the villains, you can stab them in the neck, poison them, toss them into the sea, leave them for dead, and they're back on their feet in a day or two like nothing happened. And I'm not exaggerating. That exact thing literally happens with Braith. Stabbed, poisoned, drowned, left in a pile of corpses, and he miraculously recovers within a chapter. That's not a satisfying near-death escape. It's borderline parody. At times it starts to feel like I can see the trajectory being laid out too cleanly. The villains, they keep winning over and over until the end of the final book, where they'll inevitably lose, but not because the story organically led to their downfall, but rather because the series has run out of room and needs to wrap up. And that's not cathartic. It's not dramatically earned. It's just frustrating. Even when the book tries to convince you that the villains has suffered a serious setback, it almost always ends up being a fake out. A chapter or two later, they've regrouped and we're right back to the status quo. Lycos and Jael in particular are the worst offenders. They've escaped death and disgrace so many times that it starts to feel like Gwynne, he's just seeing how far he can push reader patience before we start calling foul. And while we're here, the kidnappings. My God, the kidnappings. By the time you reach the end of Ruin, you've got characters who have been captured 3, sometimes 4 times, often by the same villains. We've got secret passages being used multiple times in a single book to allow for miraculous escapes. We've got main characters arriving too late to every important confrontation. We literally watch Jael's forces murder Tuckle, set fire to Graham's hold, and somehow still escape unscathed while Corbin's forces just kind of stand there and let them flee. These aren't minor nitpicks. This is a core plot structure that starts the strained suspension of disbelief. And part of the problem is pacing. Gwynne still seems a little afraid to go too long without an action sequence. And to his credit, he writes fantastic battle scenes. He truly does. But when nearly every single chapter contains a fight, it starts to blend together. The nonstop action eventually becomes noise, and the characters don't always get the space they need to reflect, to process, or to grow. Sometimes, less truly is more. Look, I love so much of what Gwynne is doing here. The emotional arcs are powerful, the world building is rich. The characters, especially Veritas, Macwin, Camlin, they shine. But when it comes to the villains, the plot armor, the convenient escapes, the miraculous recoveries, it all starts to wear thin. And as we head into Wrath, I'm hoping, desperately, that some of these threads finally snap in a way that feels truly earned. If you made it this far into the series, you don't need me to tell you to keep reading. At this point, you're already invested. You lived with these characters for 3 books, and you felt the emotional weight of their journey. Ruin absolutely rewards that investment. But let's say you're someone still deciding whether to even start The Faithful and the Fallen, and you're wondering if it's worth committing to a 4-book epic. First, what the hell are you doing watching a spoiler-filled review of the 3rd book? Second, my answer is yes, with a few caveats. First and foremost, this is a very much an epic fantasy in the classic mold. We're talking sword and shield combat, chosen one prophecies, kings and queens, betrayals, magical creatures, gods at war, and armies clashing in wide open battlefields. If you enjoy that old school heroic fantasy vibe, but want it written by a modern hand, this is one of the better series to scratch that itch. It also is highly digestible for epic fantasy. Compared to something like Wheel of Time or even parts of Sanderson's Stormlight Archive, this world is much more approachable. The prose is clean, the world building is grounded, and the magic system, while present, isn't so complex that you need charts and appendices to keep track of it. Gwynne's focus is always on the characters first. That said, there are a lot of characters, and this is one of the most common complaints I hear, and it was one that I had as well, especially early on in Malice. The sheer number of names, places, and allegiances can feel overwhelming, especially since there are no character lists to refer to. But if you stick with it, by the time you reach Ruin, those relationships can really start to pay off. The cast narrows emotionally, even as the plot remains wide. Now, if you're someone who needs deeply intricate political scheming or philosophical world building, this may feel a bit straightforward. Gwynne isn't trying to be a Song of Ice and Fire. His world is much more classic good versus evil, though he does play with a moral complexity in individual characters. And I want to be honest, as we just discussed, some of the plot mechanics can feel repetitive. The villains especially get so many miraculous escapes and reversals that suspension of disbelief starts to wear thin. And if you prefer stories where victories and defeats feel more evenly balanced across both sides, this might test your patience at times. But for me, despite those frustrations, Ruin delivers exactly what I want from heroic fantasy. The emotional highs are genuinely powerful. We have strong loyalty oaths, we have triumphs that are earned through sacrifice, and we have moral struggles that feel honest rather than melodramatic. And when Gwynne lands those moments, he actually sticks to landing. If you're looking for a modern epic that honors the roots of fantasy while still feeling fresh, The Faithful and the Fallen, and especially Ruin, is absolutely worth your time. At the end of the day, Ruin is mostly what I want out of a penultimate book in a fantasy series. This is where the story hits maximum tension. Every thread that's been building over the last two books, they finally collide. The stakes are higher, the emotional payoffs hit harder, and the world feels like it's teetering on the edge of collapse, and there's no easy path forward. Yes, I have my frustrations, but even with those issues, Ruin delivers something that keeps me fully invested. Heart. These characters, Corbin, Veritas, Macwin, Philae, Camlin, they've grown into one of the most compelling casts in modern heroic fantasy. Their arc feels earned. Their triumphs, they feel hard won. Their losses actually hurt. And even when Gwynne leans on familiar tropes, he finds ways to breathe new life into them. In a genre packed with sprawling epics, The Faithful and the Fallen stands out because of how human it feels. This isn't about complicated magic systems or endless political intrigue. It's about loyalty, brotherhood, and sacrifice. It's about what people are willing to fight for and what they're willing to give up along the way. And Ruin captures that beautifully. Now, with Corbin captured, Adana's forces broken, and the forces of Azeroth marching towards victory, everything is in place for Wrath to bring the series to its final, brutal conclusion. The board is set, the pieces are in motion, and if Ruin is any indication, Gwynne still has plenty of surprises waiting for us. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends, family, and even your enemies. Just nobody carrying around a voodoo doll. And of course, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button because every subscriber inches me one step closer to taking over the galaxies. Until next time, take care, keep reading, and I'll see you in the next one.